All right. So, welcome to Grail Country. Jed and I have had Jed and I have both been really busy, and we haven't had a chance to get back to our series on Bulgakov's dogmatic interpretation of the Apocalypse of John for a while. And I think we actually recorded an episode on this chapter, and then the internet ate it or something. I talked to Jed and asked him, said, "Hey, do you want to record it like we normally do, or you want to do a live stream?" And he's like, "Let's do a live stream. Sounds like fun." And I'm like, "Okay, let's do a live stream." So I think Sherry at least is going to join us at some point in a little bit.
Oh,
And
cool.
if anyone else wants to jump in, we're going to kind of use Bulgakov's interpretation as a beginning point, but we were talking a bit off camera before we started, and we both agreed that there's just a lot more to be said here beyond Bulgakov's text. So maybe we'll start there and see where it goes. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a link in case anybody wants to come in, because like I said, we're just going to kind of we'll be referencing Bulgakov's text a bit, but we're just going to be more generally talking about the meaning and symbolism of the woman clothed in the sun. I've said enough. Jed, go ahead. Give me your thoughts.
Okay. Well, goodness gracious, this one's in terms of just symbolic significance, it's not. I don't think it's by accident that this kind of finds itself right in the middle of the book. Kind of this linchpin chapters, kind of 10 through 13, have a. It's kind of almost like the narrative core of the book, and it's presenting some of its most significant symbols. And this woman clothed in the sun is, I think, maybe one of the most powerful and evocative symbols in the entire
Well,
book.
the text calls it a great sign,
Hmm.
right? So that should catch our attention right away. It doesn't just say a sign; it
Hmm.
says a great sign.
Hmm.
So why do you think it's called a great sign, and why should we pay attention to it, and how can we begin to understand its meaning?
Well, I mean, I think the great sign, I think, is it the only one that's referred to as the great sign in the book of Revelation? I don't remember if it is or it isn't, but it's definitely marked out as this one's significant, even in the
Yes.
narrative. Um, but the like its greatness is I think connects to its all-encompassing nature, right? This is
Yeah.
something that when you really peel back the layers of the imagery, because this image, even by the time you get to the book of Revelation, it's a very ancient image, both within Judaism, but also within the pagan traditions in the cultures that surround the ancient world. So it's already a very ancient symbol, but it's loaded with this new significance that I think is that John is drawing out. And Bulgakov, I think, is very keen to tie this into his understandings of Sophia, right? Both in her divine and creaturely mode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that, like, for Bulgakov, it's very important as a symbol for Mary and for the church. But I think that there's some opportunities to look just how many layers this image actually has, because it's a densely laminated image.
One of the interesting things about that is that despite his sociology, Bulgakov actually is fairly conservative here.
Hmm.
Like essentially in Bulgakov's chapter, he's like, Israel married the church. Yes, all three, and in these ways. And of course that's correct. Um, and but that's all there is to it. It's interesting because M.L. Bach in his chapter on the same image, he talks a little bit more about the universality of the Queen of Heaven image,
Hmm.
and he actually ties it to the idea of the world soul.
Hmm.
And this actually would explain, like, particularly with the dragon image being there too, this also goes a long way toward explaining, like, what precisely is the nature of the animosity between the serpent and the woman.
Hmm.
Because essentially, in creating the world of the serpent, like the serpent has usurped the position of the world soul, which is
Hmm.
Sophia.
Hmm.
So it's interesting that Bulgakov. I mean, he doesn't go there here. He certainly hints in that direction in other places, but he doesn't go there in this particular text in this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Well, I
it's
think,
probably because it's called a dogmatic interpretation, so he's like trying to stick within certain boundaries.
yeah. Well, hey, I want to respond to Anthony here. I think it's a good idea just to read the first few verses of chapter 12, just so we can
Sure.
kind of all be working from the same page as far as just the images. So I'm going to read verses,
I'm
chapter
wondering
12,
if
verses
I
1
don't
through
know if he's
7.
talking about the chapter, just for clarification, I'm not sure if he's talking about Bulgakov's chapter or if he's talking about Revelation 12.
Let's start with the biblical text. And
Perfect.
then if we need Anthony,
Do you want me
if you need us
to,
to elaborate,
what,
I've got chapter 12 pulled up here.
you
So
got it pulled up? Okay.
yeah. So I'll just go ahead and read from Hart's translation.
Okay.
So I'll read just the first 7 verses. If we get further into the chapter today, great. But
You know
so
what?
it says,
You might want to go back to the very, very end of chapter 11 because, like, the very, very tail end about chapter 11 about the ark and the temple is, in
yep,
my opinion, connected.
yep. Okay, so I'm actually going to back up here to uh, chapter 11, verse 14, which the transitional verse into this section that actually is part of
Perfect.
chapter 12. Okay, so starting in chapter 11, verse 14, the second woe has passed. Look, the third woe comes quickly. And the seventh angel sounded the trumpet, and there came loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the cosmos has become the Lord's and his anointed's, and he will reign unto the ages of the ages. And 24 elders seated before seated before God on their thrones fell down on their faces and made obeisance to God, saying, we thank you, Lord God, the ruler of all, who are and who was and who are to come, because you have taken your great power and have reigned. And the Gentiles were indignant, and your ire has come, and for the time for the dead to be judged, and for giving your reward to your slaves, the prophets, and to the holy ones, and to those who revere your name, the small and great, and for the destroying of those who destroy the earth. And God's sanctuary in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his sanctuary. And there came lightning and flashes and noises and peals of thunder and an earthquake and a great hailstorm. Now moving into chapter 12. And a great sign was seen in heaven, a woman garbed with the sun and the moon beneath her feet, and on her head a chaplet of 12 stars. And she was pregnant, and she cries out, enduring birth pangs, and in agony to give birth. And another sign was seen in heaven. And look, a great flame-hued dragon, who has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. And his tail drags along 1/3 of the stars in heaven, and he cast them onto the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth. When she should give birth, he might devour her child. And she bore a son, a male child, who was about to shepherd all the Gentiles with a rod of iron. And the woman with a rod of iron, and her child was seized away to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, and there she was in a place prepared for her by God, so that he might nourish her for 1,260 days. And we'll go ahead and just finish up in chapter 7. And a war broke out in heaven, that of Michael and his angels waging a war against the dragon. Okay, there we go.
So what's interesting to me is that you can see, like, I'm really glad that we decided to go back and read the very end of chapter 11,
Mm-hmm.
because you can see how how that ties it to the beginning of a cosmic restoration.
Mm-hmm.
And I very strongly had in mind as you were reading Tomberg's myth of the creation of the world of the serpent from Meditations on the Tarot,
Mm-hmm.
because you can see how it is, which also reinforces my inclination to want to connect this figure also to the Sabbath Queen, because it is the world of the Sabbath which the serpent seeks to undo by
Mm-hmm.
closing it off so that it's
Mm-hmm.
no longer open to Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so here we have like that the beginning of the restoration of the breaking of the power of the serpent who is about to momentarily be cast down as this. So that is what this sign is signifying. It's just
Yes.
signifying the beginning of the end of the world of the serpent and the triumph of the Sabbath Queen and the world of the Sabbath.
Yes. Yeah. So the I don't know where you want to start, Nate, but the just going back to like what you're drawing on here is, I think that if we get into verse 19 with the opening of heaven and the Ark of the Covenant being visible, Margaret Barker has a lot of work on that specific, like the role of the Ark of the Covenant is kind of the chariot throne, right? And this striking association between Mary and the throne, right? And so I think that there's actually the appearance of the Ark of the Covenant and the appearance of the woman clothed in the sun are actually dual aspects of the same image.
Right. Yes, I agree.
So I think it's something that, as we look through the book of Revelation, you have to understand that like the way that the symbolic order functions is they have kind of like an amplitude of, you can have it refer to an earthly reality, a heavenly reality. And so it has that archetypal function at the top level, but all the way down, it's kind of accumulating image, like symbolic significance all the way down through down to the ground level. And so, the interesting connection between,
well, because a person, a properly formed person has all those levels, right? So they so they exist as a person. Let's take in this case, in the case of this image, and at the level of a person, it is Mary. At the level of like a nation or a people, it is Israel. At the level of whatever is beyond the nations, we have the church. And then ultimately we have also the cosmic level where it's also where it is really Sophia herself as well. So it's all of those things. It's just different levels of the same ultimately cosmic reality.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, hey Sherry, how are you doing?
I'm good. Had a live stream this morning and another one now. That's kind of nice. I dragged out my Apocalypse of St. John and his description. Does anybody think we should read it or no?
I actually shared a bit of it before with Jed, but I think it's great. Like, if you want to read it, that would be great. I think.
Yeah, go ahead and read, and I'm going to step away for just a quick second.
Specifically, if I could point toward like the two bits that I think are important is the very beginning of the chapter where he talks about how, how Christianity not only does Christianity like not lack a mythology, that it is actually the consummation of mythology. I think that is important, and then also where he talks about like the universality of the woman and child image, I think are both super relevant.
Okay, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure exactly where that is. I mean, I can read the very first paragraph.
Okay, just read as far as you want.
In the first paragraph, he says, "It is not so very long ago that an essential claim of Christianity to superiority over the pre-Christian religions was based on the fact that Christianity was thought to be free from mythology. This attitude has greatly changed in recent times, and as a matter of fact, the assumption is not true. The Christian religion is by no means without mythology. In a sense, Christianity is even the climax and consummation of all mythology." And then when he gets into the actual passage from Scripture, he says, "At the apex of the book," meaning the book of Revelation, "at the seventh trumpet, Christian mythology is revealed on a grand scale. As spectators of the drama in chapters 12 and 13, we perceive the very heart of the myth of Christianity. In three figures in particular, age-old conceptions of the gods are collected and reborn. The first portent visible in heaven is a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, her head crowned with 12 stars. She is about to give birth to a child. The second figure is the dragon, who lies in wait before the woman. The third figure is the archangel Michael, who with his hosts conquers the dragon and his train. The vision of a queen of heaven, a great divine mother who gives birth to her child, or already carries it on her arm, did not begin with the Christmas story. This picture is a universal possession of all the races of the earth. In ancient Egypt, men looked up to Isis, who bears the Horus child. The Greeks paid homage to Demeter, the great mother in Eleusis. And when they represented the goddess with an ear of corn in her hand, signifying that all creation on the earthly globe is her child, then Demeter Ceres appeared, only as a variation of the Heavenly Mother, carrying the child in her arms. Celtic Europe, too, had its Madonna. Thus, in the grotto of Chartres, which later became the crypt of the cathedral, the picture of the Virgo Paratura has been venerated from pre-Christian times, the Virgin who is to bring forth a child. Even in the Far East, the picture of the Virgin Mother with the child is known everywhere. With unearthly tenderness, the Quanon figures of Eastern Asia touch our souls. In short, the pictures of the Christian Madonna by Raphael and other painters would not be fully understood if they were assumed to represent only the historic figure of Mary, and not also the cosmic archetype, which is a universal constituent of the myth of humanity.
I just Sherry, just really quick, the image that he's talking about from Chartres was also known as Our Lady of the Underground.
Oh, okay. He goes on into the kind of the history of the image, but then he says here, and I'll just read this, and then because I'd have to read the whole chapter actually, but I'll just read this. It is the myth of the human soul which is revealed here, in the heart of the apocalypse. The woman in heaven who appeared to the writer was seen by the clairvoyant souls of the ancient peoples and described as the Heavenly Mother, because in this picture the world soul itself appears. Our whole cosmos, to which not only the earth but sun, moon, and stars belong, may be compared to a human being. Like a human being, the cosmos also has a soul. We see the body of the cosmos with our physical eyes, although we cannot survey it as a whole. We are ourselves too tiny a part of it to have a comprehensive view of its total form and to recognize all the details as members of its body. The soul that dwells in this cosmic body, the world soul, is not visible to our physical eyes. The intuition of the clairvoyant pre-Christian people once saw it in the picture of the heavenly woman, and eventually it appeared to the seer John, the first to attain the new faculty of vision. In the revelation of St. John, we divine the time when humanity, under the sign of the Heavenly Mother, will be able to again to open the spiritual supersensory eye. So,
can you guys see that? Can you guys see what I just shared?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something I retweeted this morning from Jesse Hake. God's creation is personal. Being in his image and likeness, an anthropocosmos, the potential of God-given human nature manifests in each individual's body, but moreover, in the whole of created universe, can become our body, its external peripheral extension.
Yeah.
Which was from an article. With that was from a piece by a Bulgakov scholar, actually. So
interesting.
And this is what Bach is doing. Is like he's talking. That is why this image is universal. Mm-hmm. It's universal because she is also an image of us,
and we of her.
And we of her.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll also kind of jump in with some of the stuff from Margaret Barker from her commentary here on Revelation. And it's very interesting. So this is in this chapter, Sherry, if you ever want to pull it, it's in chapter 13. It's just titled "The Woman Clothed with the Sun." So it's just exclusively on this image alone. And what Barker does is she kind of cites several different layers of within this image, that are contained within the image. So one is the Queen of Heaven, and then the second is the Daughter of Zion, and the third is the Lady Wisdom. And then I'll get over here. So the fourth is the Holy Spirit, and then the final one is the Mother of the Messiah. And so one of the interesting things that she also draws out in her discussion on the Queen of Heaven is that she equates this with some of the Kabbalistic notions of the Shekinah, right? Or Shekinah, right? So there's like these really dense layering of what the image itself entails. And in a sense, it's the whole world, right? Or the anthropocosmos, like the tweet that Nate read is referring to. So I think like when we're looking at all of these different images, we're looking at like a very tightly packed image. So she introduces the chapter, and I'll just read the first couple paragraphs here. The heavenly sanctuary has been opened, and the long-lost ark is seen again. A Jewish tradition recorded in the Numbers Rabbah, and that's in chapter 15, verse 10, said that the ark would be restored to the temple in the time of the Messiah. And this is the vision of his birth. The woman clothed with the sun is his mother, the Queen of Heaven. She is the ancient goddess of Jerusalem, venerated for centuries until banished by the temple reformers in the 7th century BCE. She is also the constellation Virgo. When the sun is in Virgo, and she is the reigning sign, that is in September, the birth of the Messiah was expected. At the autumn festival, the birth of her son was celebrated as the enthronement of the king, and she was both his patron and heavenly mother. Looking into the sanctuary beyond the veil, the visionary sees the events outside of time. Here, the child is born and enthroned before the creation of the material world, just as Enoch describes the man in heaven. And at that hour, the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of the spirits, and his name before the head of days. Yea, before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were named, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. So that's in Enoch, 1 Enoch 48. And she goes on to say this. This is just the final piece that I'll share here. The woman clothed with the sun wears a crown of 12 stars because she is the Queen of Heaven. The 12 stars may represent the 12 tribes of Israel, as they did in Joseph's dream in Genesis 37. But there can be no doubt about her son. He is the royal child destined to rule the nations with a rod of iron. The woman's child is caught up to the throne of God, just as the royal child was set on Zion as the Lord's king, begotten that day as his divine son. Psalm 110 describes this birth. The Lord addresses the psalmist's king. The Lord said to my Lord, and commands him to share the divine throne. He becomes the priest forever in the manner of Melchizedek. And the Melchizedek text, that's 11q Melchizedek and Qumran, shows that this was understood in the 1st century CE. Melchizedek was a divine figure who took his place in the heavenly council and prepared to bring the day of the Lord. The intervening lines in Psalm 110 must describe the process by which the human king became the divine Melchizedek. He has an army prepared for holy war, freely offered people, and he stands in the splendor of the holy ones. The rest of the obscure verse yielding the follows. Today I have begotten you, and she's reconstructing the text. Today I have begotten you from the womb, the morning star due to you. So dew, D-E-W. The dew probably refers to resurrection. The dew of light brings resurrection in Isaiah 26. And the dew was the means of resurrection in later texts. When Israel was overcome by the divine presence at Sinai, for example, the Lord brought down the dew that resurrects the dead and revive them. That's in another Mishnaic text. The process of making the Melchizedek high priest was described in the 1st century CE as resurrection, and Morning Star was the title given to Jesus and promised to the faithful angel of the church at Thyatira. The womb must have been the heavenly mother from whom the king was both born and resurrected. So anyway.
So funny. I was just listening to her this morning.
Oh, to Margaret Barker.
I was listening to, I was listening to her talk on what King Josiah reformed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're familiar with that one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty controversial, but like she's building off of some pretty good critical scholarship in terms of
sure. And I was in a discussion with someone about the banishment of the feminine, right? According to Margaret Barker, the banishment of the feminine from the First Temple.
Mm-hmm.
And I was comparing that to iconoclasm, which happened both in the Orthodox Church and in the Protestant Reformation, which is again the banishment of the feminine. And so the question that me and the person
that might be counterintuitive to some people. Do you care to elaborate on how the banning, how iconoclasm is an action against the feminine? I'm not disagreeing with you. I would just like you to clarify that for those who it's less.
I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can clarify it like really clearly, because this is how I think about it. When I had that conversation with Martin Shaw, he asked me, well, how do you feel about the Orthodox Church? It's kind of like, from the distance, it looks like a bunch of old guy, bearded men dressed in black, right? And I never had that image when I thought about it, because for me, when you enter the church, you're greeted by the Virgin, Theotokos. Okay, she stands like this with her arms open, right? And then I use this is my description of what I found. So if I peek into in through the door of a Protestant church, it looks like a man decorated it. If I peek into the door of an Orthodox church, it looks like a woman decorated it. Okay, so
now I can a very succinct way to put the intuition that you have is that it's beauty that is the connection.
That's very succinct
to the feminine.
Yeah, and it's not just beauty that you perceive through your eyes, right? But it's the incorporation of all the senses and of like, I'm not even sure. I really haven't articulated this well enough, and it's actually on my heart in recent days to learn to articulate this better, because I think it's really important. I actually think it's a matter of life and death for the church. I do, but there's something like the feminine is much like the Hermeticist in the sense that Tomberg talks about it, right? The feminine is in the background, and it's synthesizing things. It's bringing things together, and so it's not explicit, and it's easy to miss. And it's happening on all kinds of levels. Like, it's not just one, it's not just because there's lots of nice pictures and some colors and some candles going in the church that it's feminine. That's not the only reason. I mean, there's actually a woman right over the altar. Okay.
Right.
So there's a lot of reasons why.
So let me ask you this. It's interesting. As you were thinking, here's where my mind went to wanting to dig into why the woman is described as being clothed in the sun.
With the sun.
Clothed with the sun, yes. Clothed with the sun.
I don't know. Jed, do you have any thoughts?
I'm actually scrolling over to chapter 17, just because I want to look at the contrast between the woman clothed in the sun and the harlot of Babylon. So I'm just doing some digging here. But okay, Nate, what are your thoughts to your question?
Okay, well, let me see if this makes sense to you, Sherry. I think like the fact that she's clothed with or clothed in suggests that.
Well, I mean, it's
someone had to give the garment to her so that she could be seen.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
right?
Who do you think that someone was?
Well, her son, I would say, who is like a priest. Like this goes to the idea of Melchizedek as a priest of the sun mysteries that M.L. Bach has, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Right,
well,
and the obvious association between Christ and Melchizedek and Christ and the Son.
okay.
So
So this is actually,
it is her son who elevates her and closer in the Son, which allows her to be illumined and seen for what she always was.
okay. So I have this really interesting thing going through my head right now, because George MacDonald makes it really, really clear that God is our Father, right? Like that's his heart, is that God is our Father, and he showed me that what Jesus does is he reveals the Father. But if you think about that, it's the Son reveals the Father. Okay? If you don't have any children, you aren't a father. Okay? Your children reveal the Father. Like that's how the Father is revealed. It's by having a child.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So like each one of you is a father, but he's not revealed until he has children, and then he's revealed, right? And so that was something that came kind of became glaringly obvious in a way to me. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, well, of course he came to reveal the Father, because he's the Son, and the Father can't be revealed if he has no son, if he has no children, right? And so now I'm wondering if the woman clothed in the Son, now I lost my train of thought. Like, how does is she revealed by the Son, or is the Son revealed by her? Because she goes into the wilderness to have a child, right? And so there's something there. I don't know what it is, but it's just there's something close to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
Well,
I have to think about it.
I think there's all kinds of stuff, because there's like all kinds of like, you get into like all kinds of like complexities about like the way we have thought about the divine feminine, which has had like an aspect of the earth, chthonic hiddenness, but yet she is also the one who bears she also is the one that bears the divine Son.
Mm-hmm.
So she gives this. So let me put it this way. We could say this. We could say she delivers the divine Son, like literally delivers the divine Son. But it is the divine Son that reveals her glory.
Yes.
Is that?
Well, he reveals both, right?
Right. Correct. Yes, in showing his glory, it reveals her glory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and it's interesting because her clothing is the sun, right? And if we look, I mean, we'll have to like later in our Revelation study, we can get to the whore of Babylon, but it's interesting to contrast how she's clothed versus how the woman who's clothed with the sun. And so chapter 17, it just says that, referring to the whore of Babylon, and the woman clad in purple and scarlet and gilded with gold and precious stone and pearls, holding in her hand a gold cup filled with abominations and with the impure things of her whoring. So she's kind of...
I gotta say something about this. I didn't know this until recently, but does anybody know about how the purple dye was actually made in antiquity?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's made from a shellfish, but the actual process is like you have to let it ferment, and it's really wretched and putrid smelling. So it like gives like an appearance like the purple like has this like association with royalty and authority and all this, but actually the process that goes into making that die is actually really nasty
Hmm.
and revolting.
Well, and it's like, I mean, just to bring like a modern sensibility and perspective to that, like being clothed in the sun is, her clothing is not artificial.
Right.
That's what
It's
I was thinking. Yeah, yeah.
right.
Yes.
It's she's clothed with nature itself versus, I mean, of course, like ultimately the source of all the stuff is nature, but she's clothed in scarlet and in purple, which are both, you know, at that time in the ancient world, those were signifiers of being up in the upper echelons of society. They were opulent. They were incredibly expensive. So that's what the Whore of Babylon is clothed within. But the woman clothed in the sun is clothed with something that is not made by hands.
Yeah, exactly. And Anthony says here, not garments of skin, and then it just reminded me that there's this aspect to this garments of like before the garments of skin were given, that these people were just like pure light,
Clothed
right?
in light. Yeah. That
Which is
actually goes back into
which is like an uncreated light, which is what the sun would represent in a sense, I think.
Mhm. Well, and it's also, if you kind of the imagery is also the imagery of Virgo, the constellation Virgo. And so you know, Virgo is an earth sign, right? So the earth being clothed with the light of the sun speaks of this meeting point of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That the earth is clothed with the light of heaven.
Yeah. And Bach, in what I read there, he kind of indicates that she is the cosmos that we can't see, right? So she's the image of all those constellations. And
all the light we cannot see yet again.
All the light we cannot see.
Yeah, that's on Netflix, by the way. Now, if you
I know,
that's
why I watched my wife and I were taking care of my mom last weekend, and we watched the entire miniseries.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and actually, it's funny because right before we had watched it, I had this like argument with. It was like not a. I mean, my mom's sick, so it's not like I was going to have a serious argument with her, but we had like a mild disagreement about like the understanding of truth because I was referencing George MacDonald's unspoken sermon, "I Am the Truth," where he talks about like he goes into digs into the idea of truth as a person, as opposed to a fact in the world. And I just thought that then we watched that series, and I think that at the kind of the key moment in that series, it does a really good job of illustrating precisely that. It's like, oh, the facts are not enough.
Yeah, the facts don't add up to the truth.
Yeah.
So I want to go into the fun, like really provocative side of what Margaret Barker gets into when she is equating certain aspects of this imagery with the Holy Spirit. So, it gets into kind of one strand within ancient Christianity was the Nazarene sect. And they believed that the Holy Spirit was feminine, the divine mother, right? And so, or the divine sister, very interestingly. Although the Book of Enoch preserves material from many periods, the wisdom material is consistent throughout. Most is known elsewhere, but in First Enoch adds the gift of wisdom and resurrection was to be the sign of the last times. She would be given to the chosen ones to resurrect them on the day of the Lord. At the end of the 7th week, they would receive sevenfold knowledge about the creation. Those who have wisdom will be saved at the end, at the judgment. Wisdom stands by the heavenly throne and gives Enoch eternal life, which enables him to see his visions. Eden imagery is used throughout. In his visions of heaven, Enoch sees a huge fragrant tree whose fruit gives wisdom, and therefore presumably eternal life. And Enoch saw fountains of wisdom flowing around the throne and the thirsty drinking from them. There are also fragments from the Jewish liturgy preserved with the Christian editions in the apostolic constitutions. These depict God as the Father of wisdom. The only Son is God the Logos, the living wisdom, the firstborn of every creature, and the angel of great counsel and the high priest, God spoke to wisdom when he said, "Let us make man after our image." Non-biblical texts such as these show that Israel's second God had two aspects, male and female, but insufficient evidence has survived to form a complete picture. The fusion of El Elyon and the Lord in some post-Deuteronomic texts and the attempt to suppress all evidence of the royal cult complicate matters further. Such evidence as survives shows that, one, both the Lord and wisdom were angel figures who had been allocated Israel as their heritage. Two, both the Lord and wisdom were presented in the high priest. Three, both the Logos and wisdom were the firstborn. Four, both the Logos and wisdom were co-creators. Five, both the Lord and wisdom are associated with the image of the menorah.
Yeah, I just listened to this morning.
This is why Jesus was believed to be Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. The goddess is most familiar in her role as the Holy Spirit. The power in creation is the Spirit moving on the face of the waters, creating all things and creating humans. Wisdom inspired the kings, yet this was also the Holy Spirit from on high. That's Wisdom of Solomon 9. Wisdom had passed into the holy souls and made them prophets, Wisdom chapter 7. And yet it was the Spirit that entered Ezekiel in chapter 2. The Spirit was poured out and brought the gift of visions and prophecies as a sign of the last times in Joel chapter 2. Wisdom opened the eyes and was given to the elect in the last times. Early Christian tradition remembered the Spirit as the mother and the one enthroned in heaven. Origen quoted a saying of Jesus from the now lost gospel according to the Hebrews. My mother, the Holy Spirit, took me by one of my hairs and transported me to the great mountain Tabor. Jerome, commenting on Isaiah 11:2, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, quoted from the same source as the account of Jesus' baptism. The Holy Spirit descended and rested on him and said, My son, in all the prophets I was waiting for thee, and thou art my first begotten son that reignest forever. The Gospel of Philip denied that Mary was conceived by the Holy Spirit. So the Gospel of Philip is kind of the counterexample. When did a woman ever conceive by a woman? Isaiah, in his vision of heaven, saw the ascended Lord sat at the right hand of the great glory, and the angel of the Holy Spirit sat on the left. And that's in the ascension of Isaiah, chapter 11. So the woman clothed in the sun, according to Margaret Barker, and I'm inclined to agree, is speaking maybe if you're not comfortable with the idea of the Holy Spirit as feminine, at least an aspect or a manifestation of the Spirit in this feminine aspect. I mean, I'm comfortable going further than that, but I think that it's a very important image.
So, but isn't the word spirit in Hebrew feminine?
In Hebrew and in Greek, it's feminine. In Latin, it's
neuter in Greek.
Is it neuter in Greek?
Yeah.
Okay, neuter in Greek, masculine
neuter in Greek,
in Latin.
feminine in Hebrew, and masculine in Latin.
Right, and so I think that it's spirit's encompassing basically the full linguistic realm of masculine, feminine, and neuter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I have to show you something here, quick.
So the Spirit's role in bringing, if you look at that, tying that into Pentecost, the Spirit's role in bringing about the birth of new children is very, the children of God being kind of born on Pentecost, the church being born on Pentecost, I think speaks to part of what this image is signifying, is that they're not, yeah.
Just want to show you this.
Oh. So she's in the tree of life.
She's in the tree. It's her genealogy, actually.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But it's also a tree, right? And I don't want to step on any of my Jewish friends' toes, but Margaret Barker this morning was talking about Asherah, which was a tree in the first temple, right? It was a tree, and it was and menorah.
Well, I mean, the menorah is an obvious tree of life symbol.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how you could look at it and not see that.
And here's a question, Nate. Isn't Jewish genealogy through the mother?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
So there you
days.
go.
Yeah.
And that would be a tree of life. Right?
It would. A family tree.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've made the identification of the Holy Spirit being feminine lots of times, so that's gonna be nothing new for Grail Country listeners. I think that it's actually weird that we. Well, it actually goes to what we start. What we start to dial it back to kind of where we started. It has to do like one of the reasons why it should be obvious to us that it's feminine is that we have every symbolic mythological warrant to think that it is because of the universality of this feminine figure. Like
Well,
it's always
the first verses of the Bible present the spirit in feminine terms.
right. Right.
Yeah. So here's a question now, because we're actually talking about the image in Revelation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking for some time actually about the fact that she goes into the wilderness to bear the child. Any thoughts on that? Does Margaret Barker say anything about that, Jed and I?
She does. I can pull that. Well, Nate's
Yes,
kind of
please.
answering.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. No,
Yeah,
no.
Nate. Any thoughts from you, Nate?
About why?
About her going into the wilderness.
Oh, because that you have to always go into the wilderness before you have renewal. Well, and also, like this actually goes. Actually, I want to say a little bit more about that because it's right. We've been talking a lot about the woman, but the image we actually have is of a woman, a child, and a dragon. But we also have a knightly image too in Michael.
Yes.
The archangel who intervenes on behalf of the woman and the child to fight against the dragon and his forces. So it's actually in picture form. We actually have the archetypal story of the knight, the lady, and the dragon.
Yeah.
In the image in Revelation 12.
Mm-hmm.
It is the archetypal story.
Well, of course it is.
Well, and the reason it's the archetypal story is because guess what? That's every single one of us. That's our story. And you know what? We are the knight, we are the lady, and we are the dragon at various times.
Yep. Give me a moment here. I'm still pulling the reference on the wilderness, so give me a minute on that.
What comes to my mind when I hear the word wilderness, of course, is right away is the quote from Meister Eckhart where he says, you know, come, how does he put it? Come to the desert and you will see. Oh, geez, I have to find it. He says, there is a wide wilderness in me. And it's not, he's talking about, well, it's not quite clear if he's talking about himself or God, right? In that quote. And I just try to make it easy on myself and say he's talking about both of them at the same time.
Well, you also think of the Exodus, and you know, there's a way at which the wilderness is also like it's a place where it's what's the right word?
Well, Meister Eckhart says this. He says, you will not find me in the usual places. Come to the desert if you'd like to see. Look where you might become lost for a while. There is a wide wilderness in me. Mm-hmm. And that's the sense you get from the woman, right? That she has to flee to the wilderness and that she's kind of lost, right? Like she's still alive. She's had the child. She's out there, but she's lost to us. Like she's hiding, right?
Yeah, she flees to the wilderness for 1,260 days.
Mm-hmm.
What do we want to make out of it?
Well, I think that you have like two very interesting wilderness birth narratives in the Hebrew Bible, right? You have the first wilderness birth narrative is the birth of Israel as a nation, right? So they are drawn out of Egypt and they become a nation in the wilderness, ready to go in and take the promised land, right? So that's one birth. So I think the wilderness is the place of formation, kind of the austerity that brings about abundance. But that happens again. It's almost like the parallel happens again when Israel's exiled. The house of Judah is exiled in Babylon, and there's a second birth in the wilderness and a return to the land, because the Exodus imagery is, especially in the book of Isaiah, kind of the second Exodus, moving from Babylon this time as opposed to Egypt. And so I think that the wilderness theme is the kind of the latent potentiality of the womb, right? It has not yet been defined as abundant land, but it will grow into that. And that imagery is actually throughout the prophets, right? Where the wilderness will break into bloom. And so I think that the wilderness is definitely at least including that concept.
It's also Christ is also led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan.
Right after he was born, or right after his second birth narrative, which was the Spirit descending on him as a dove.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Interesting.
Did you find that bit you were looking for, Jed?
So it's a little bit all over the place. So like her dealing of the wilderness has to do with exile, right? The exile of the Queen of Heaven, and kind of tying into the way she's interpreting the Deuteronomistic reforms, where the Queen of Heaven was booted from the temple.
Yeah.
And she ties that concept is throughout the book of Revelation.
She's been booted from a good chunk of the Christian tradition.
Well, see, this is what I was talking about before when I said, when you look into a Protestant church, it looks like it's been decorated by a man.
Yeah.
And
if it's been decorated at all.
This theme of the woman having to flee to the wilderness, right? So she's gone, like she's hidden, right? She's gone. And she's being chased down by the dragon. What it says to me is that there's something really, like the dragon doesn't want the woman to be seen, in a sense, right? He doesn't want her to be present. He doesn't want her to be known. And so she gets chased out. And we see this happening over time historically, right? That the feminine gets chased out. Right. And I found that really interesting. Like even as a woman, I don't even know.
And here's the thing. And so she's crowned with stars, right? And the dragon is also crowned. And there's a natural rivalry that is between them, which ties back to, I think, both to the idea of this being an image of Sophia, or the world soul, and also, like, I think I have a strong inclination to want to tie this to the idea of the Sabbath Queen and Tomberg's myth of the serpent and the closed world of the serpent. And I do not know why my camera turned off. I'm trying to fix it.
Is it too warm? Sometimes they get too warm.
Maybe so. No, weird.
Yeah, I'm just like, okay. So if something,
yeah, there I go. I'm back.
So I've had this underlying thing that I thought through years and years and years ago, that many fundamentalist religions or religious people, the first thing they do is cover up the woman. Like literally, they cover her up, right? Even in Christianity, like they make her as plain as possible, like so that the beauty can't be perceived, right? And in Islam and in Judaism, and it's just it's just there, right? And so there's something about chasing this out And I say this because I don't even know why. Well, first of all, I don't know why it would be a threat to the dragon. Maybe you can help me figure this out.
Well, because the authority, okay, because
And I also
the authority
don't know.
he has claimed, the authority that he has claimed, the authority that makes him prince of this world, it belongs rightly to her. It's her authority that he has seized.
Okay. But then
And
what? So is that what he's chasing out? He's chasing authority, or is he chasing beauty? Like what is it that he's chasing?
So what's interesting here is that if we look at the colors and the imagery associated with the dragon, right? The Hart's translation doesn't pull this out, but the dragon is depicted as scarlet, right? Or many-hued, but fiery, essentially.
Okay.
And the whore bears the same colors. So when she was once, so I'll back up and say that there is kind of a dual aspect between the woman clothed in the sun and the whore of Babylon. They're actually, I think, two aspects of creation,
Totally.
right? And so creation that is in its divine, like the divine humanity, let's say, or the divine co-angelicity in humanity is depicted in that woman in the sun. When she is depicted in her fallen aspect, she's depicted as the whore. And what has happened is her garments of light have been stripped away from her, and she has been alienated from her children, right? Because the whore doesn't have children in the same way that the woman clothed in the sun does. And she's given the garments that are the dragon's to wear, right? And so she takes on that identity, and is and so I think that where that connection kind of comes in is that we're looking at two aspects of the same reality, or this liminal thing where we're kind of in between those two realities. And which side are we going to go toward?
Yeah.
Are we going to embody the woman clothed in the sun, or are we going to embody the whore of Babylon?
Yeah,
right?
and again, this works at all the levels.
At every level.
Yeah, I think that's precisely right.
And there are some aspects that are solely reserved for the woman clothed in the sun, the ones that associate her with the throne, with the Messiah, with divinity itself.
So I want to bring up Anthony. I want to highlight Anthony's question here. Isn't the dragon chasing her because of her child? Yes, and I would say specifically the reason that is the case is because it is the child who illumines and reveals who she truly is.
Who she is.
Which breaks his power.
Right. And it is also the child that represents potential life itself, right?
Well, and wisdom is vindicated by her children.
Well, yeah, but see, like, there is no life without children.
Right.
Right. So that's why I would like to devour the children, because then there's no life. Like, human beings would go extinct. Right.
Right.
And I think that, like, going through the book of Job with Jess, I remember thinking to myself, okay, so Satan's wandering around in the halls of heaven, okay, and God bumps into him. I mean, he's almost bored. He's wandering around with nothing to do. And God bumps into him and says, hey, where have you been? He's like, no, I'm, going to and fro, doing my thing. Not really finding much to do. And God's like, you want something to do? Have you seen Job? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a scene where one of the friends, I can't remember what his name is now, it just doesn't come to mind, but he dreams that this dark spirit's hovering over him and the serpent is wrapped around it. And it's very ambiguous, right? It's like God wrapped in Satan or something. Like, it's very ambiguous. And it says there is no one righteous, right? There's no man is righteous. And so you get this sense that Satan is just disgusted by human beings. He just thinks, because God says my strength is made perfect in weakness, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's got, Satan's looking at at these worms basically made out of the dirt. And God's going to accomplish all these amazing things, and angels are amazed by this plan, right? Like these are the things they want to look into. They're like, how's this ever going to work? And Satan's like, not that. Okay, anything but. Like, come on, I'm the smartest dude in the realm, right? I've got all the knowledge. I'm the light bringer, and you want to use that, right? That's his thing. I've even heard people talk about the temptation as Satan trying to spare Christ from this disease called humanity, like done in a kind of compassionate way, right? Where he's like, you don't have to do this, man, you know, because he doesn't know what God is doing, right? This is the thing that angels long to look into. He doesn't know, and for him, because he's so self-absorbed in his own wisdom, he thinks this is ridiculous, right? And so, all that to say, it makes every sense to me that he would be waiting to what? Devour that child, because that means that man continues to live, right? That is life. Those children that keep being brought into the world.
Well, that child is life.
And of course, and that child is life, but all children are life,
yes.
Right? The child represents the ongoing existence of humanity.
The openness of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on this. I'm working on a short story where I'm playing with some of those images, and so in this short story that I'm working on, there's this like the kind of a Lilith kind of figure is a character in the story, and she has had her she's like this dragon lady essentially, but she had her scales of light were stolen from her, right? So her light was stolen from her by the great dragon, which he used to disguise himself as a dragon of light. So he ripped her garment of light off and gave him her scales, the scarlet and purple scales, right? To kind of clothe her.
This might sound really random, Jed, but does this have anything to do with the term drag queen?
No.
Okay.
No, it's taking place as a war in the as a science fiction war in the constellation of Draco, right? So anyway, but the way that she's forgotten who she is. She's forgotten that she was once clothed in light, right? And so in a sense, I look at that, Lilith really helps us, like George MacDonald's Lilith helps us look at that whore Babylon in these sympathetic terms, is she's lost her way. She forgot who she was, right? Because she's no longer in that Virgo sign, right? She ceased to be the virgin earth that's clothed in the sun.
There's a description of the whore that there's a couple of things about the whore that are interesting, where she hoards all the waters. What do you think that means?
Well, I mean, the immediate symbol that kind of counteracts that, I feel like, is the high priestess in the tarot deck. Okay. Right. No, she kind of freely pours out the waters, right. And she's the light that exists above the water. But yeah, so I think that, like, the hoarding of the waters is the contraction of consciousness itself, and the contraction of the life-giving source of consciousness. So that's how I see some of those images, at least one way to read them.
Well, it's also the opposite, but the thing is that I think of Tom Briggs' Meditations on the Tarot, letter 11, where he talks about the image of the Virgin, and she's the one who waters. So it's actually an inversion of the proper role by hoarding the waters as opposed to pouring them out. Mm-hmm. So it's actually an inversion of the proper role of the feminine.
And water is life, right?
Mm-hmm. 11, is that which one is that in Tomberg? Which card is 11?
It is actually the one. It's the one that has the image of the Virgin prying apart the jaws of the lion.
Okay, the strength card then.
So, force, yeah.
Yeah.
Force. Yeah, and that's the divine feminine as a unseen, force.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which he equates with love, ultimately, in the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of the martial imagery throughout the warfare imagery throughout the book of Revelation is trying to essentially have you it puts you into the crisis of who are you going to identify yourself with, right? Are you going to identify yourself with a woman clothed in the sun and her child and as one of her children?
I just want to say yes to this, and then point out that in the upper right hand corner of the screen, the Grail Country logo.
What were you just saying, Jed?
No, I think that that we're being kind of driven into like this. There's that provisional dualism throughout the book of Revelation, right? That's kind of associated with a whole host of imagery. But are we going to associate ourselves with the woman clothed in the sun, or the woman who's riding the back of the dragon and clothed in scarlet and purple, right? The one who loves you like a mother should love you, or the one whose love is only transactional and is actually not love at all.
Right. Yeah.
And so these are the kind of things that I think as we look at
the dragon eventually goes to devour the woman.
Yeah, the dragon hates the woman. Yeah. He wants to possess her, but he certainly doesn't want to love her, right? Versus like the union of the bride and the lamb that follows the fall of the whore of Babylon is the son who gives everything to be with his bride, right? That's where we're being pushed into, like, hey, if you're not associating yourself here with Christ, with the bride, with the woman clothed in the sun, here's where you're heading. Here's where your destiny is carrying you. And so I think that the images are meant to ultimately evoke a response. That's
kind of interesting because, like, we just talked about that this morning a little bit in Dante. Someone made the comment that, Christ's the bride is not the body, or something to that effect. And I was like, no, the bride and the body are the same thing, right? So with the dragon trying to devour the whore, they haven't become one flesh.
No.
Either. Whereas the lamb and the bride, right, become one. So,
yeah.
I just read the latest comment.
So I can go back here. So not so much with Barker, but here with okay, cool. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. We got to pull this up.
I did when you were looking in the book.
That is rough. Whew. We're with you on that, perennial force. That's awfully strange. So I'm just trying to see how far back I want to go here, but Bulgakov does a good job of describing the wilderness. So in page 90 into 91, this is what he has to say. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman, which brought forth the man-child, that is, the church. Although the realm in which the dragon could act was limited through his being cast down, it became more bitterly anti-Christian and anti-ecclesial. His outright struggle with the church begins henceforth, and this could not have been said of the Old Testament church. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but that's what he's saying. Then the dragon did not yet know with complete clarity whom he had to overcome, and therefore he squandered, so to speak, his seductive energies. Now he stands before the woman and seeks to kill her, to destroy the church. This refers to the very beginnings of the church history, when she stood before him in childlike vulnerability. As the Apostle Paul says, not many of you are wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God hath chosen the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to be brought to naught the things that are. The persecution and even annihilation of the church of the first Christians could at that time have seemed like something that would be quick and easy to achieve. But the church was defended by God's guidance and impervious to Satan's evil and cunning schemes. This idea is expressed in the following: and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she may fly into the wilderness, into her place where she would be nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. The wings of the mighty eagle may be understood as a simple allegory for her swiftness, of her instant removal into her place, inaccessible to Satan, but also for divine inspiration, triumphantly preserving the prey from the pursuit of the enemies. This idea, expressed in the symbolic language that is characteristic of all the 12th chapter and does not require a particular explanation. The wilderness is obviously spiritual gatheredness, or sorbonost, with that connection of the church's spiritual forces, which has been her nourishment and her preservation in times of temptation. One can also see the feat of prayer and ascesis, by which invisibly in the wilderness the church has been preserved over the course of her time. The latter is defined by the apocalyptic period, a time, end times, and half a time. This period of time makes us relate these times in general to the whole earthly existence of the church, because there has been no time when the dragon did not pursue her, and when the flight into the wilderness and spiritual ascesis have not been born in the church, who is aloft on the 2 wings of the great eagle. So anyway.
Yes.
Again, the wilderness is...
Okay, so the wilderness, let me just make sure I have heard that right. The wilderness is gatheredness, sobernost. Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, the spiritual gatheredness, so that conciliar sense that the church is kind of gathered in the wilderness becomes the divine council in the wilderness of the world.
So it becomes a social entity in itself. No?
What was that? I'm sorry.
It seems to me that it actually becomes like its own social entity, like its own community, right?
A community in the wilderness. Yes, I think that's appropriate.
Okay.
Well, let's see. You have the after being freed from Egypt, that's the Israelites go into the wilderness, and that's where they're gathered together by God before they're passed into the promised land. So I think it has to do with the anticipation of what's to come as well. You're gathering for a purpose, right? What is the gathering?
Yes, it's expectant. What? It's expectant.
Yes, correct.
But it's also it's
not an end to itself. It's and we know it's not, because we've already been, remember the tail end of chapter 11, we've already been hinted at what's being prepared, for which the danger requires a gathering together in the wilderness, but it's not the ultimate. We already have a hint at where it's headed from the tail end verses of chapter 11, because we already see the heavenly temple with the Ark of the Covenant. And we've also already been told that the cosmic victory is won. That it's just a matter of the gathering of the people, so that fullness can be revealed.
Well, it's where I think that that wilderness, again, to return to the Exodus motif coming out of Egypt, is the place of formation. it's where Israel becomes a nation able to, not only survive in the wilderness, but to thrive in the land. Right. So they take on a political character as Moses helps, give instruction and law, to appoint elders,
Let's
and
talk about that
overseers.
for a second,
Well,
Jed.
to me, I would just say that is like God's economy, right?
Right. But it's being stuck there. They're learning how to fight in the wilderness. Right? They're put in situations where they have to, this was a slave population with no military prowess whatsoever. When they leave Egypt, they're in the wilderness. They have to fight to survive.
Yes.
And so, like, a lot of these things that are going to become necessary for Israel in the Promised Land are being formed in the wilderness. And I would say that the Promised Land text is actually very much present in the book of Revelation in the Millennium passage. That is the entrance into the Promised Land.
Yes. And I think, well, the presence of Michael is a reminder that this is still always also referring to Israel too.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. Yeah, I don't think I know how I want to say it yet, so I just won't.
Well, I think what
I'll
we
wait
have
until I know how I want to say it.
Well, I would say this just to build off of what you've already said is that Bulgakov will talk about the church and Christianity in his commentary, and he's giving a dogmatic interpretation. So there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be aware that when John is writing the Apocalypse, there isn't such a thing as Christianity yet.
There's no Jerusalem anymore either, which is the part that I was going to point out.
I think he's writing. I would say he's probably writing before the destruction of Jerusalem, and is kind of heralding its destruction.
You think so? Generally it's dated to about 95.
I think I would put
which would be after.
With Bulgakov and with John Baer. So John Baer does a great discussion on this as well. I think that the Apocalypse was probably written somewhere between 64 to 68. And then the Gospel is written sometime between 90 and 100. So the Gospel comes after the Apocalypse.
So you think the Apocalypse is written earlier in Hebrew, and then maybe the Greek text dates to closer to 100, but that you think maybe the earlier Hebrew version was written maybe before?
It could have. Well, I mean, given the Semitic nature of the Greek, that's certainly a live option. I mean, I couldn't say one way or the other, but I think that the evidence is that Revelation may be actually one of the earlier books in the New Testament. Probably the only ones that are earlier, probably Galatian, some of the early Pauline letters. So this is probably written before. Maybe the only gospel that had been written down at that point was the Gospel of Mark. But I think that, so when we're looking at the book of Revelation, you're talking about, the Jesus followers within Judaism predominantly. Right. And it's thoroughly Jewish in its imagery and its expectations. Yeah. And so and it has a lot
of parallels with Jeremiah.
Right. And so there's this splitting, and there's this dual aspect, though, that is already opened within the 24 elders, within the gates of the New Jerusalem that have the 12 apostles as the foundation stones, and then the 12 gates, the 12 pearl gates that are the tribes of Israel. Right. So there is a dual aspect here, but not necessarily one that would ultimately develop into Christianity and be understood as the Christian religion. But at this stage, that Christianity would not have been conceived of as something separate from Israel and the Jews.
And also, I think it's appropriate to say that prophetically looks toward a time when they are unified again. Which is why it's like clearly working at both these levels. And I mean the Archangel Michael's presence as the guardian, like, really strongly emphasizes that connection to Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be back here in just a moment.
Sure. Any thoughts, Sherry?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts, but none of them are. I have to figure them all out.
That's where I'm kind of at too. That's where I'm kind
Yeah,
of too.
and like it's so interesting that I'm having this conversation with you right now, because my whole week, actually for the last couple of weeks, has been like I've had these people that I have loose connection to who are like, anyway, I've just been confronted with this whole thing about the divine feminine in the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been like random conversations with really random people. And there's been a sense of the woman being chased into the wilderness by the dragon. Okay. It actually happening in real time. And so it's like before this conversation, I had a sense that there's something really important happening right now. And I don't really know what it is, but it has to do with the divine feminine. And so there's just, I don't know. Like for me, this is what I said to a friend this morning. To me, everything is connected. Okay. So what's happening down the road from my house, what's happening in my community, in my town, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in this little corner of the internet, what's happening in the Ukraine. These are not random things. This is that chaos theory, the idea that this is not a perceivable pattern, but underneath of it all, there's a beautiful pattern that's happening. And so because I believe that, I think that there is a vibration, basically, in the air, right? Call it a morphic field, call it whatever you want, that we're all really, we're breathing it in, we're tasting it, we're participating in it without really realizing it. And
how would you characterize this frequency, vibration, field?
I don't, well, this is the thing that I don't really know, but I think it has a lot to do with chasing the woman into the wilderness. That's what I think.
Yeah, well, and I think that like the epochal shift, though, is that the woman goes from the wilderness, the woman clothed in the sun goes from the wilderness to be reasserted and to be shifted out of the background of the wilderness into the foreground at the wedding feast of the Lamb.
Just as a point of on this comment here, it's like, yes, but it's the presence of the dragon that causes that to be necessary.
Yeah, she has to go
and have a place in the wilderness is because of the threat presented by the dragon.
And I watch my livestock do this. Okay, like they know that there's predators out there, and they go somewhere to prepare a place, right, to give birth. That's what animals do, and it's not because anything's chasing them there. It's because they know that the potential for danger is great, right, for their child. Because there's a dragon. There's always a dragon.
There's always a dragon. And we often are the dragon, as I pointed out earlier.
But Nate, let me say this: like, if you think of the conflict in the Middle East right now, who's the woman, right? And where is she being chased? And you know what I'm saying? Like, this pattern is repeated. It's fractal, right? So it happens in our personal lives, it happens in our communities, it happens in our country, it happens in the world, right? And
I can't get away from thinking about the conflict in the Middle East. It's like a daily part of my life, because, well, for one thing, it's just like it's hitting my wife like really hard. It's hitting her very hard, and I just don't like.
Yeah, but this is my whole point, Nate. This conflict in the Middle East isn't an anomaly. It's not an island, right? It's not happening away from anything else. It's happening in connection to everything, and everything, right? So what reverberates out from this, like I think that the battles that we face, all of our battles, are battles that are happening in the heavens, right? And they descend down, like, you know, on earth as it is in heaven, right? So when they descend down, then we get to see them with our old eyes, like Meister Eckhart says. But we feel the tension; it's everywhere, and we, because we look at everything with our old eyes, we don't see the connection to what's happening. You don't see the woman being chased into the wilderness everywhere.
Well, I think I would say this, because I tend to tread a little lighter on how those things connect. I think that it's, you know, the manifestation of warfare on the earth is what sends the divine humanity into the wilderness, right? And awaiting the, like, Sophia is hidden until she's ready to be fully revealed. And that, so the reassertion of the divine feminine, where the woman clothed in the sun becomes the bride of the Lamb, right? And is shown forth as kind of in this nuptial bliss between creator and creation. Like, what I see those wars as a signifier of the total lack of balance, right? Where it's almost exclusively in this masculine register, where we all go, and the only way to resolve conflict is through bloodshed. And, you know, so when I see these conflicts flaring up around the world, and they certainly are, and they're probably going to continue to do so, is I see that as all like a manifestation of that deeper capture that allows us to see each other's enemies. And like the divine feminine is what brings that back together. There's a conciliatory aspect to the work of Sophia in creation that is the many, but the many unified as a single whole. And so when we see these wars and these conflicts, I tend to look at them in that register of, this is yet another manifestation of the violence that is what happens when we get so dominated by that masculine principle that, you know, is kind of like the hammer where everything is a nail.
Well, you know, I heard
but Michael is very much a representative of the masculine principle.
Right, but he's going to war for the children, for the woman's children. Like he's contending directly with the dragon. He's not setting the children at war with each other.
And right, well, and he's going to defense in war and defense of not just the child, but the child and the woman.
Right.
Who is Israel? Who Michael is, the archangel, who is the protector of Israel, as an archangel, is one of his roles.
Mm-hmm.
That's also true. Can
I just say this really quick, because I think this is pertinent to what you're saying, Nate. Is like I heard recently, it was such a good observation. Someone said, I'm in a moral quandary because of this war, speaking about the Middle East. And the other person replied with, well, we're in this war because of a moral quandary. And see, I think that latter statement is more true. It's more true. We find ourselves, these things, manifestations are when the spiritual becomes, you know, visible, right? When the invisible becomes visible. When we see the war, it's because the war has been already happening on another plane. That's how I see this, right? And this is a war in the heavens between the woman, but she's not warring, but the dragon is trying to eliminate her completely, and she has to go and hide, and in order to keep her children safe, right? And so, like, and I'm not saying it. There's no one-to-one about this stuff. Like, this is all of this imagery is very. It's like it happens inside of ourselves, even, right? there's a woman and a dragon, like Nate said earlier. So, but it also manifests and a knight, yeah, and an angel, right, an archangel, and
well,
and
the
it,
angel is the knight in this case.
I know, but it manifests in the world, right? And I thought when I heard that statement, I thought that is exactly right. We are in a war because of a moral quandary, right? So, but the thing that I'm thinking about lately, and I'm kind of excited about thinking about it more because like I said, I think God's doing something, and there's something that even I, as a woman, right, which doesn't make me entirely feminine, but I don't understand about the divine feminine. There's aspects to the divine feminine that I can't see, right? Because she's hidden. And so this is great to have conversations like this. I think it's important.
Let me go back to this real quick. So I like this comment, but I think that I think, yes, the feminine at war with herself. But if we're using the imagery, it's the feminine and the masculine at war, not necessarily with each other. They are, right, in the imagery of the dragon and the Whore of Babylon. They're kind of partners together, but they have no love for each other. So there's conflict there. But then you have the masculine conflict between like these two prophets and witnesses and the two beasts of Revelation. And then you have top level conflict between Christ and the dragon. So there's conflict in the book of Revelation at every level across the masculine feminine divide, so to speak.
But
and
the
dragon.
Oh, sorry.
But I think that she's right. That the idea of the feminine at war with herself. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's not just that. I think that this is kind of the war of all against all is what is being described in the book of Revelation.
Well, would you say, Jed, that the whore and the dragon are not what the masculine and feminine are? They're the
distortion or the negation.
Right. And the lamb and the bride are the true feminine and masculine, right?
Correct.
And
well, Michael is also a true image of the masculine because Michael
well, he's
is leading the host of heaven, but he's doing it in defense of.
But wouldn't
the woman and the child against the dragon.
Wouldn't he be both though? Like if he's genderless, like angels are supposedly.
Oh, Michael's a masculine.
Masculine doesn't have to. I mean, I'm talking masculine and feminine. I'm not trying to map onto biological sex at all. I'm talking about it in the way that Lewis would talk about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's how I understand it too. But I'm just saying, like I don't know. Is it up for like? Does Michael have a feminine side?
You'd have to ask Michael. But generally, like he's seen as representative of the masculine impulse.
Okay.
So, Michael's got a sword. Yeah.
Well, there's a few Greek female saints that carried swords too.
That's true. That is very true. That is very true.
I don't know if we can get into that.
That sounds like a whole other stream.
Have to get into some Freudian stuff there.
Yeah, well, I mean, going into the wilderness, if the wilderness, like if you want to talk about Sophia, wisdom, the divine feminine, the Holy Spirit, as something wild and uncontrollable, it's scary, right? And I think that is an aspect of God that, in my conversation with Martin Shaw, he used the example of how he used to imagine Aslan breaking through the stained glass window of his little church when he was a kid, and shaking the congregation up, grabbing them by the back of their neck and shaking them up, right? So it's like, Yeah. I was just responding to the whole scary thing, you know. There's, I think it's wild and unpredictable, right?
Well,
This
that's
is
like
this is this is
that's
what you're
like
getting at with Baba Yaga, right?
yes, this is what I was like. Yeah, right. Oh boy, I was wondering. I almost went there earlier, but then I like stepped
You're
back from the
afraid.
precipice of getting into the complexity of the divine feminine. Yeah, because that's like the triple goddess. It's like, yeah, I don't know if you did you catch any of that, Jed? I think I talked about it in the Voxer where I don't really like the rebranding of the crone in the triple goddess as the matriarch because like to me like the language like the traditional like crone image is like it's pointing toward a particular aspect of the divine feminine that we have to reckon with if we're going to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with its association with death, which we don't see at all in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost, when I started talking about Our Lady of the Underground, that's when I almost brought it up. And and also in the context of like the light we cannot see, divine darkness, like all of these things are pointing towards something. It's like, you know, and the Eckhart line you referenced earlier about, you know, about seeing with a different set of eyes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I admit I had a reaction to that conversation with you, Nate, but I'm I'm learning. You know, so I'm
It's
open.
funny because you actually
More
like I think that I wouldn't have been able to speak as articulately about it as I was able to
open.
had I not like I learned a lot from you. I really did. I learned a lot from you. Like particularly like and particularly in like learning to talk about like death in a more nuanced way.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Well,
between you
that's
and between you and my long friendly argument with Oscar, like those are the things
Yeah.
that forced me to really think hard about it.
well, those are things that are also associated. Like if you look in, uh, like if you're, I'm less familiar, unfortunately, with a lot of the European mythology surrounding like the goddess of death, right? But the divine consort in the Shiva traditions is Shakti, and she's associated with destruction and death.
Mhm.
And the same divine aspect in like the Vedanta traditions is as Kali, right? The goddess is manifest as the giver of life, but also the bringer of death. So there, in the realm of creation, there is like this death element that has to be present in order for new life to come about. And so I think that's an important piece. But I wanted to back up, Sherry, because Nate and I
This
talked
is
about
such
this.
a good comment from Upcycle Club right here. The crone is the crone, both seer and the midwife. Yes, like
Mhm.
that's it. And that close and that seer and midwife and the close association with death, like those things go together because it is through death and into true life that she is the midwife.
What
Well,
were you going to say?
I wanted to go back. You said something, Sherry, about like vibrations
Yeah.
and Nate and I have been kind of talking about, from Anthony Doerr's novel All the Light We Cannot See, which the Netflix series is out. Watch it; it's amazing.
It's
Okay.
really
Um,
good.
it's truly amazing. They did a great job of really staying true to the source material in there.
You've seen Dark, Sherry, so it's actually the lead actor from Dark is in the series.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. But I was thinking about I was actually really thinking about some of the things that Dora talks about in terms of like the darkness is all the light that we cannot see. And in terms of cosmically speaking, like there's that narrow band of visible light. And then on the other side of the light is like the infrared, infrascale. And then it goes down to radio waves, right? These lower vibrations then coming into the visible spectrum and then going into the ultra radiation of ultraviolet, so on. X-rays, gamma rays, ultra gamma, right? That's all light. That's all radiation.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a narrow band of the radiation that's actually visible.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think, as a metaphysical concept as well. It ties into like Dionysus and the divine darkness, Meister Eckhart, they're all working in this similar register.
Yeah.
Is that there is a luminous darkness that is present in the world. There's an evil darkness that's present in the world as well. And you don't want to confuse the luminous with the evil, right? But that luminous darkness enables you to see things and perceive things at a distance. And like radio waves, you can't see them with your eyes, but you can hear the light. It's the light that hits your ears, right? And so there's our different sense organism, our touch, we can distinguish infrared radiation and ultraviolet radiation with our touch, right? Your skin will burn if it's, if it's exposed to UV rays. And so I think that vibrational or that frequency is like what it allows us to do is to see, we have different senses. So I would say that the inner sense is what allows us to perceive that divine darkness, right? That inner sense that allows us to perceive it in some way. It could be a perception that is analogous to touch or smell or hearing or taste, right? The eyes are what take in the visible light, but that's the only organ in the body that takes in the light in that way to where it's visible.
There's a connection to faith to me, right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a connection between faith and all the light you cannot see.
Yeah, it's the seeing that doesn't see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me too. I talked to Jess about this once. When you like draw or paint using negative space, I did this exercise in this painting class that I took once years ago, where you have to draw the negatives, like you have to fill in the negative space only, and then the picture of the thing that you're actually focused on it emerges out of the negative space, right?
I think that this comment is very pertinent to the negative space.
Yeah.
All right, the negative space is where all of the potential resides, waiting actualization and definition. Yeah. And the fact, one thing we didn't hit on, I think is really important, and I only have a few minutes left and I'm going to have to duck out, is she's crowned with the 12 stars, right? The woman is, clothed with the sun and crowned with the 12 stars. That's her crown. So I'm interested to hear from both of you what, how those images are kind of what they're speaking to.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, I don't think, for me, it's like both clearly pointing toward the zodiac and the fullness of space.
Yeah.
But it also is clearly a reference to the 12 tribes of Israel. It's not either or. It's both. And again, it's like these things work at levels. So there's a way in which the fullness of Israel points toward the fullness of the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the bride image, right? So like when I think of the 12 stars, I think of a crown. I think of the sign of Virgo. I think Virgo happens in September, right? It's the harvest. It's the fullness of the harvest, right? It's when everything comes in, when there's bounty, when there's abundance, when there's fertility, like all that stuff is happening, right, at that time. And it's all tied up together with this cosmic image, which I think is representative of the bride, the church, right? It's like when I hear people talking about the church, I just insert humanity in there. Okay, that's my heresy.
Well, that's the meaning of church. It's just the assembly. Right, the council.
Yes, it's the human beings. It's the human beings, right?
Well,
and
it's the
bride.
It's the household of God,
and that's why the woman runs into the wilderness, because she has to preserve humanity. Because the woman giving birth represents the procreation, right? It represents the survival of the human race. And so when she runs into the desert to preserve that child, she's preserving all of us, every single human being in the world, right?
Yeah.
And as Anthony pointed out to us, God prepared a place for her in the wilderness so that she would be protected.
Yes. And she's listening, because she had, in other words, she had to go there, right? Like she had to go where God prepared the place. And so she had to listen. And there's a lot of there's just, this woman here has been my mystery. She has been my mystery for a long time, because I think, like I said this once before, one of the things I realized about the Theotokos, and this is only one of them, is that she is the stuff of me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, and that's what she imparts to Christ, humanity. Okay.
There's like the very first email I ever sent to John Vervaeke had to do with about why we need to about the divine feminine and why we have to imitate both Mary and Christ. And that is because they are both principles that are contained within us.
Well, they also participate in their own creation, because they both say, let it be, right? Like John Bear says, right, Jed? We're supposed to, God says, let there be, and then he comes to us and says, let us make. And we're supposed to then say, let there be, right? And it's both Mary and Christ that say, let your will be done. Like, let there be, right? It's a reciprocal relationship with both of them. And that's why she knows where to go in the wilderness, to the place that God prepared, right? Because she's in communion with God.
Yeah.
So, but it's really taking up a lot of my headspace at the moment, honestly, because I just can't shake the fact that I think something is happening in this realm. Actually.
Yeah. Something is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And
she is associated with resurrection. I think that's kind of the what the potential of death and destruction of our time is answered with resurrection and the vindication of wisdom. She's vindicated in her children. And so that those 12, kind of piggybacking on Nate, the 12 stars being signifier of Israel, I would say, also the apostolic community. We see this repetition of the 12 in the 24 elders. We see the repetition of the 12 in the 144,000. We see the repetition of the 12 in the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem and the gates of the New Jerusalem.
Isn't 12 also the number of the Olympian gods?
I think so.
Joseph pointed out the other day in the box, he made a really interesting contribution, actually, that in Judaism it's not 12, it's 13. and that this is why Judaism doesn't have a superstition.
Oh, right, because you have the one tribe that's omitted.
Well, yeah, there's always one that's not as well. Even in there's 13 in Joseph's vision. There's Joseph and then the 12 brothers. And so
right. And so, like, this is when you were talking about this 12 and 12 and 12. I was thinking about what Joseph said, and I thought, well, wait a minute, the woman is also there. Yeah, she's 13. Right.
Right. So there's
not lost.
There you have it. It's just 12 Olympian gods. Nate was right.
Yeah. But I think that looking at what the stars are, I think that the stars are, in some sense, we can just stay within chapter 12. The stars are her children. They are her crown.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the 12 Olympian gods thing. It's like that brings me back to the whole thing that I said earlier about how this is anthropocosmic, right? Because there's a way in which we contain within us all the gods, but they're at war. They're always at war with each other.
Well, I've said this out loud a few times, and I'll say it again. the whole idea of incarnation, and not, like, not talking about things in archetypal terms, because as Martin Shaw said once, it denatures them, right? So Thor is thunder, and Thor is a god, right? Or is God. So thunder is both God and thunder, right? Wolf is wolf and God. So you have this two natures, right? Thing that's going on.
I'm not talking about archetypes, though.
No, in order to understand the thing properly, you have to give it. You have to. Yeah, I'm falling short. I'm getting tired here, but it's like fully God and fully human. Okay, and that's what everything is. Everything
Which means to no longer be divided into parts.
Yeah, everything is,
Which
like
means, and the way you're no longer divided into parts is to exist as a whole, which is the whole mystery of Christ. Like Christ is, that is what solves the war of the gods at the microcosmic level and at the cosmic level.
And with the Titans and the Olympians.
Yep.
And there's some great John Keats poetry around that.
Yeah,
and a few really fascinating science fiction novels written about that too. The same title.
Yeah. I almost mentioned it earlier in our live stream earlier today, but 12 hours a day, like 12 hours a night. Oh, I'll save that thought for later. I'll just put a pen in it. Well, it sounds like everyone has things to do. I do too. I've got something planned with my kids. So
nice.
I think thank you all for joining us, but I think we'll wrap this one up.
Fantastic.
I'm talking about this.
We'll
probably talk about this again.
The introduction to the next introduction to the next introduction.
I don't feel like I've remotely exhausted what I have to say.
How do you talk about something that can only be described apathetically?
Yeah. I don't think I've said anything particularly definitive. I don't think I've said anything particularly well. And
yeah, me either.
I feel like it's something I've just begun to talk about. So
yeah, same here.
Room for more conversation later.
Yeah. So. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Yeah.
It was nice to take part.
So if I screwed some stuff up royally, hey, I was doing the best I can.
It's not that we don't fail here. We just try to fail in the right direction.
That's right.
Falling forward.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Take care.